He has triple board certification in family medicine, geriatrics, and hospice. He has taken 230 medical students from Des Moines University on academic programs participating in global health service trips, kind of service learning of a sort, and serving underserved people in 26 different countries. Besides being a charter board member of the U.S. Center for Citizen Diplomacy, I'm also on the board of the Iowa Council for International Understanding. And each year we recognize somebody that came to Iowa ostensibly maybe to study or something, but they end up staying and contributing to our state. And so last year's award winner was Dr. Shah, and it honors people who have immigrated to Iowa, he in his case from India, and have contributed significantly to the people of the state of Iowa. So I'd like to again thank you for being here. The other physician is Dr. Jeffrey Heck. He's the executive director of the Shoulder to Shoulder program. He's the founder and executive director, which is a partnership between 13 health centers and the rural communities in Honduras, Ecuador, and Tanzania. Dr. Heck is a professor of medicine at the University of North Carolina, and he's a noted expert on the fields of education and international health. Our other presenter today is the former First Lady of Honduras, Mary Flake Flores, and she's had originally from New Orleans, so she's had a wealth of experience with hurricanes, and both in Honduras and Hurricane Mitch, as well as having family still in New Orleans. I know you're a proud mother because what she said she's doing here, in addition to being at the conference, is visiting her daughter, who is the Honduran ambassador to the United States. So, welcome, Mom. You obviously done good. So.
Should I go up?
Please. Which would you feel more comfortable?
Do you, or you want to be up there?
No, you go there. You're the speaker. You can see the slides too from there.
Okay, but you're going to be...
We'll be your fans.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here, and I feel like that two people in the audience should be up here with me because they were so important to the time that I was in Honduras during the hurricane, and that is our former ambassador Jim Cragen, who's here. Hello. And then Suzanne, now I've forgotten your last name. Brooks, Suzanne Brooks, that was with USAID, with all the CIK, with all the international aid. So I really feel they should be here, and they will probably participate a good bit after I finish. This is a difficult hour for anyone to come and listen to speeches, and I've been so impressed with everyone that I've met here at the summit because they're so interested in everything that's going on. And you've been through so many different sessions that I'm very pleased that you still were awake and interested to hear me talk about my experience during Hurricane Mitch. And I became First Lady because I happened to marry a very ambitious young man that I met at LSU at the university. And I had my background in marketing and textiles, and I was working in a department store as a buyer, and I had no idea what I was in for when I married an engineer from Honduras. And I came to Honduras in the 70s, and while my husband began his newspaper and starting his political career, I took care of my children, and once they were in school, I started working in the public hospitals. And there I saw the great need that Honduras has for medical care and for education. I was working in one of the oldest public hospitals that's 130 years old, and I was working in a nutrition center, and there we literally saw babies and young children die from lack of good nutrition. And I also helped many other women working together to form the first cancer ward for children in Honduras, because they were all mixed in with all the other children at a time. And we had a lot of help from the American citizens to do that, and also from the American Embassy. When I became First Lady, it was very difficult for me because I was the first one that was an American citizen, someone that wasn't Honduran. And by law, the Honduran First Lady becomes president of the Institute of the Child and the Family. In the Institute of the Child and the Family, they cover all the children's problems. They're really responsible for all these orphanages and centers, and you're also in charge of children that are in conflict with the law and adoptions. And because I don't have a background in law, and also because I wasn't Honduran, I didn't feel it was right for me to be signing papers over giving children to new parents, or else deciding the fate of children that were in conflict with the law. Also, this big institution has a budget, but 95% of that budget goes to salaries. And so there's very little to do anything. So I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to have my own foundation, because I never wanted to be accused of using government money unwisely. So I started my own foundation, and it was already set up, and I had already received $500,000 to start the school lunch program. And also I had the honor of meeting the president of the World Bank during the first month of my husband's presidency, and I talked to him about the tragedy of children not having goals in their life, because as I worked with all these underprivileged children in the hospitals, when I would ask them what they would like to be when they grow up, they would give me answers like to work in the fields and cultivate the corn, wash and iron clothes for people, or to charge money on a bus. They thought that was very exciting, to be the person that charged the money on the bus, that they would hang out the window, out the door rather, they hang out the door and the bus stops very quickly and they jump out, and they're the ones that take the money when you want to climb on the bus. So those were exciting careers for them. And I thought, my goodness, if they couldn't aspire to anything further than what they see in their own environment, they really need to be exposed to a lot of things. And within 8 days, Dr. Wolfenson had sent 3 people from the World Bank for that project, and we had already started on the Children's Museum. And then I had the opportunity to go to a First Ladies Summit, and there I was very fortunate to meet First Ladies from around Latin America, and we made some good friendships at that conference. And also I was able to meet Hillary Clinton's staff. She didn't attend that summit, but I met people on her staff. And so later on, it was on September 20th that I had the honor to meet Billy Graham in the rural mountains of North Carolina, which is absolutely beautiful. And also on the 20th of October, we were meeting with the Pope in quite a different situation. And as I was with both of them, we were able to pray together. And the only thing I asked for was that my husband would have a good government, and that we wouldn't have any big disaster during the 4 years that he was in office. And we came back from Rome, and that was the 20th that I was in Rome, in the Holy City. And then on the 27th, Hurricane Mitch came over Honduras. And it was it hit the Bay Islands first, and the weathermen were saying that it looked like the hurricane was going north, and that it would just go quickly across the islands and turn north. And we were all hoping that was what was going to happen, but the hurricane stayed for 3 days. It was like caught between the islands and the mainland, So it rained for 3 days constantly, and depending on where you were in Honduras, you received 4 to 6 feet of water during that time. And so Jeff has a presentation.
Well, I can show these quickly.
Okay, of what Mitch did, so you have an idea that Honduras is about the size of the state of Ohio. We have 8 million people now, and 50% of those are 18 or younger. So we have a very young population, and 30% of our population live on less than $1 a day. So the hurricane, it's an immense hurricane, and this was a Category 5 hurricane, one of the largest of the century that came over. And if you can go to the next.
Yeah, you don't need that.
And this is a photo in Pine. The water just flowed off these mountains, and the rivers were just swollen. And all the people that live near the river, and a lot of people did because they go directly to the river to get their water supply. And so you don't want to walk very far, so you're very close to the river. And downtown in Tegucigalpa, the capital city, there were many old buildings built by the river, and they were made out of adobe. And so with a little bit of rain, they're just fine. But once the hurricane came through with all this water that came down, and the rivers were swollen, and they went over these houses, the adobe bricks were swollen, and then they just exploded, and you would see walls just fall automatically within a few seconds. And the next slide. And so after 3 days of constant rain, there were 1 million out of the 6, we had a little over 6 million people, but 1 million, they were homeless. And 10,000 deaths, 70% of the agricultural production was destroyed, 62% of our infrastructure. There were over 100 bridges that were lost, and it was estimated to be $4 billion worth of destruction. At the time when it first started raining, since they thought the hurricane was going to turn and take another direction, my husband and I and many people of his staff and some of the ministers took a trip to the North Coast to see how we could help the people. And we began sending people out to schools. The schools became refuge centers for all these people that were left homeless. And then we were trying to distribute enough food for all these people to live and to have nourishment during what we thought would just be a week or so. And as we were there, we were getting reports that other cities were going underwater, and the damage that all these other cities were receiving, and that the capital was being affected. So my husband decided we needed to get back to the capital so he could take charge, because this was just getting to be unprecedented in the damage it was doing. And so we began our trip back, and as we were coming back, the bridges were literally being washed out, and we were trying to find different routes to come. And as we were coming around the mountains, we were in an avalanche that came off on the side of the mountains, and we were stuck. And it was just horrible. And some of the military people that were guiding us, they could see lights, so they walked until they could find a home, and they got help with a pickup truck. A farmer came and he started picking us up, but first we had to walk about 2 miles to get to that truck. And we tried to stay close to the mountain, because we could have walked off the side of the mountain and have been lost. And we were going through mud that it covered our knees. And it was raining, and it was kind of silly that they gave me an umbrella as I was walking through. But, they were trying to protect me, and I was kind of silly looking, but we did get to the truck, and we got to a farmer's home, and then later on, they took us to another larger farm where we waited for everyone else to get rescued, and that took to the next day. And we almost lost one of our military attachés, but he was rescued a little further down the river. Thank goodness he knew how to hold on tight. So it was a terrible disaster from the very beginning. And my husband wanted to get back to his office to coordinate everything. And there was no way we were going to get back. And he called Ambassador Cragen, and the American military came and rescued us. And I have no idea why they did that, because that was a terrible undertaking, and they risked their lives to do that. And there was no visibility, and they came in on these helicopters to pick us up on this farm. And they took us back in groups, and of course my husband and I were one of the first to leave. And you couldn't see anything at all, and I remember all these young military people working just by their eyesight and looking and trying to see how we could get back. And it seemed like we were there for hours. And I remember this beautiful young girl who was there, a military person, and she was laying on the floor of the helicopter, and she was looking out, visibly looking, trying to see a little bit of light to guide us and to get us back. And she could be on the cover of any magazine because she was so pretty, but she was, very dedicated to her job, and I never got to know her name, but I remember her face so well. And after being up in the air for about 2 hours, I thought, oh, finally we made it to the Capitol, because I felt, we were landing. And we had only just gone about 50 miles, because we were landing at the military base, Pamarola, and then from there we were taken to the Capitol. So it was many consequences that these young people were going through to be able to save us. And to this day, I don't know why they said, Mr. President, you're the one that left. You just had to find another way to get back after it stops raining. But that was amazing what they did. So when we got back, it was already on all the international media about what was happening in Honduras, and people were talking about the hurricane being of biblical proportions. And if you saw the photographs for them from that time, you would probably think that also, because it was a huge flood, and you would see people swimming in the water, trying to save a little bit of what they were losing, people trying to save their cars. There were people that were trying to save refrigerators and save TVs. And they didn't really realize that these objects wouldn't have any value anymore, they wouldn't work, but they were paying payments on those items, and they meant so much to them. And they thought that maybe, at least if they had the item, that, maybe they wouldn't be paying the next 2 or 3 years on that. So with that terrible beginning, we were so impressed from the start of how international aid started coming in, and how it began so fast from all the countries of the world. And of course, the first aid was from the United States and from Mexico, and then from other countries, and everyone was coming down and trying to do something for our country. And because of the solidarity of the international community, not only did we receive visitors, but we received this humanitarian aid that came in by air. There were airplanes that were flying into the air bases, by ships, and also by boat. In the Chiquita, the United Fruit Company, they offered all their containers and free shipping to anyone who wanted to send humanitarian aid to Honduras. And that was unbelievable. And hundreds and hundreds of containers came. Also, we had visitors of very high profile to Honduras, and that meant so much to us because that meant that we were important to their countries and to them personally. And from the United States, of course, we had President Clinton that came down, and he came when the U.S. military were working on infrastructure and on bridges. They were putting in a lot of Bailey bridges. He was there, and Secretary of State Clinton was there at that time, First Lady. She came in, and she talked about our needs, and she was very eloquent in expressing what the United States could do for us. And also President Bush 41, George Sr., he came and he stayed for a good while. He came with AmeriCares and with Representative Woody Jenkins. And he was there for the day, and he had such a personal touch because he went through and he talked to our citizens that were out in the streets, and he really listened to them. And the next day when he was back in the United States and he was reporting on what he had seen, he was talking about the personal stories of farmers that had lost everything, of housewives that had many children and didn't know what to do. And he was talking about a little boy that he met that was only had a handkerchief for a diaper. But really that little boy only had a rag on for a diaper, and it was a little bit formal that his mother put something on him because most of the time these children don't even have anything on. They're usually nude. And so with these personal experiences of people coming down like Tipper Gore and Senator Landrieu, Senator Frisk, and Senator Domenici, let's see, there was just so many. And when they came back and they gave interviews on the TV, it made people understand the dimensions of our disaster and the tragedy and what they could do to help and what was necessary to help. We had important visitors like Queen Sofia of Spain that was just wonderful, and Prince Felipe, and princesses of England and Belgium and France's President Mitterrand, and the presidents of Mexico and the first ladies of Mexico and Colombia. And they were all very important because they took the message back of what we needed. But the personalities that were really, really special were the American citizens that came down, and they were there with us, and they did all kinds of work with getting us back on our feet. And it was them who were there to comfort us and to listen to the people as they talked about all their losses. And they were also so comforting in that they were there while people were trying to get through this tragedy. And they stayed with them, that later they were there to leave with a smile that they had done something to make this person's life better. In some personal stories, Mrs. Eunice Shriver came, and she came because a little girl wrote that she had just participated once in Special Olympics, and she had won medals that were so precious to her, and she had lost those medals in Mitch. And Mrs. Shriver came down as a representative of Special Olympics, and she brought those medals to give them back to her. And she stayed with us, and it was so interesting to have her with us. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, she went to the Cardinal for Mass. And just the way God works, there happened to be a 15-year-old mother that was there with a baby with Down syndrome. And she thought her baby was very sick. And she had come to church to pray for this child and to ask God, what do I do? Why was it that I have a child that's with Down syndrome? She really didn't understand what it was. And there was Eunice Shriver to comfort her and tell her that she was blessed with a wonderful child that was going to give her a lot of love, and that she should be very happy to have this child in her life. And this lady would never, this young woman would never even, I think to this day, she doesn't know who Eunice Shriver was. we had John Grisham visiting, and he was down rebuilding houses. And no one knew who John Grisham was because he looked, just like an average American. And I received emails from a woman named Mary, and she was a composer of music, that she composed music for the movie Braveheart. And she had a friend from Honduras whose name was Jesus. And so she had written me a telegram saying that that John, Jesus, and herself, Mary, were coming to Honduras, and if I could receive them. Well, I thought someone was kind of making up that email, but it did come true, and John Grisham was there with the Baptist Church, working in a southern community in Honduras, building houses. Also, Franklin Graham, this was an interesting experience because Franklin Graham came, and his group, his NGO, is the Humanitarian Purse. And they're very well known for all these shoe boxes that they give out with a lot of wonderful things for children. And they were there with medical brigades, and they were there with a lot of supplies to give out to different communities. But the most interesting thing was that as they worked in different communities, they were working right along with Cuban doctors in these shelters, in these big schools. And it's something that you would probably never think would be possible, but when the need was so much greater than political philosophies, it makes a big difference. And that's one of the most outstanding examples of cooperation between two different groups that I can think of, and they had tremendous success, and I think they both learned a lot about each other. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other people who came down. We had, from all the churches, we had a tremendous outpouring of humanitarian aid. All the different religions in the United States, somehow they played a part, because there are churches that have been in Honduras for many, many years, and they knew how to take on all these workers that were coming in and where to send them to attend the people that had the most need. And it was their base, and many of the volunteers slept in these churches, and they had their meals in these churches, and they prepared meals for other people in these churches. Also, the communities in the United States were just outstanding, and the big communities sent a lot of money. And when they sent it to my foundation, I put it into projects that would help the poor in the long run, because I didn't receive millions for housing. And from the communities of Miami, Houston, New York, Memphis, Denver, and Los Angeles, we received quite a bit of monetary help. And so they all went into different projects that carry their names. And two of the biggest donations came from Miami and Houston. So I built some shelters for the relatives of the patients in the public hospitals to stay while their loved ones are in the hospital, because they would sleep on the floor at the hospital, and they didn't have any bathroom facilities, and they were actually contaminating their loved ones inside the hospitals. Also, a lot of NGOs came down. I think about everyone that's representative here. They had someone there on the ground working and helping. The Honduran government was able to disperse of all this humanitarian aid with transparency, mostly because we were giving the aid over to the Rotary clubs and to the churches. And each community in Honduras had an emergency committee. And so I would go personally to the port to take out containers and take them directly to the community. And I would go with the military. It was escorted by the military and someone from the National Controlling Office. And as we delivered that aid, sometimes we didn't know what was inside the containers. And before I left, I would ask the director of military logistics to never tell anyone where I was going, because we didn't want to politicize the aid. And if the senators, they're called diputados, or the mayors of these cities, if they would have known that I was coming, they would be right there with that container, and people would have the perception that they were somehow involved and they were responsible for getting this container to their community, and they would take credit. So we never let anyone know where we were going. And we would go to the community and we would open the container once we were there. And sometimes we had some very unusual experiences, because in the islands we would open some containers and they would have mittens and wool caps. And then in the mountains sometimes we'd open containers and they would have sunscreen in them. But most of them all had a lot of things that were very, very useful. And there were some containers that we would receive that instead of just having miscellaneous humanitarian aid on it, they would have specific, specifically what was inside the container. And of course, the most useful containers that we would receive were, at the beginning, was water, because we had no water, any portable water, any place in Honduras. And we had to get that out immediately to everyone. And also clothing, medicine, and baby formula, diapers. They were in the hospitals. If you can imagine not having water, how horrible that would be. And that were our priorities first, to get the water to the hospitals and then to get it out to all the communities to prevent all these infectious diseases. But some of the other containers that we would receive, they were all given with a good heart, and so you had to find how you could use these donations. And someone sent 2 containers of fresh meat, and so that's something that you can't distribute. And so what we did is we gave it to communities all along the north coast where the container came in. And so everyone had big barbecues on the beach, and they had a wonderful time with this meat. And they appreciated that so much, because they've been having coconut water for I don't know how long. And then other experiences were something like toys, containers of toys. And this was wonderful for the children to receive all these beautiful toys in these packages from the United States. These were, there were several containers from Mattel, and beautiful toys, something that these children would never be able to have. And they were thrilled to have these toys, but they also sent, a half of the container was filled with roller skates. Can you imagine what we would do with roller skates in the mountains? So I had to keep those roller skates in storage, and later on I built a little small roller rink in the national park, and so the children could enjoy those skates, because you can't give them back. And then when you think of something like high heel shoes, that I received several containers of high heel shoes from Taiwan, and I was just thinking, what in the world am I going to do with these high heel shoes? And everyone on my staff was coming up with ideas, and we thought, well, maybe we could sell them to a store and use the money for something else. But you can't sell humanitarian aid. That really doesn't look good. And then what are you going to do with all these shoes? 2 containers of shoes, where do you put them? Where do you store them? And it was the logistics of what to do with these shoes. It was just something, that was taking up too much time. So I said, well, we'll just have to give them out. We'll go and give out the food, the water, the clothing, and then afterwards, before I leave, I'll give out some shoes. Well, I started doing that, and those shoes were the biggest hit, that everyone was so happy, and the women were grabbing to get those shoes, and they were so happy. And I was thinking of all the repercussions, that how the media would just be laughing at me and criticizing me for taking high heel shoes out to these poor communities, when they were walking in mud. And how would it look to be giving out high heel shoes? Well, I was thinking of that, and that's why I thought at the very end, I'll just kind of slowly give out these shoes after I say goodbye as a kind of bonus. But the women loved those shoes, and I think it was the hope that I was showing by giving out these shoes that one day they were going to be dancing again, and they were going to be very well dressed, and they were going to be noticed. And because of the loving donations of people from other communities, other countries. So that was a big surprise because I thought I was going to receive a lot of criticism, and I think some of those young women still remember me for this day for those shoes. So it's difficult sometimes when you receive all this aid that you don't know what to do with, but you have to try to come up with innovative ways because you can't give it back and you can't sell it and you can't store it. There's just not enough money to take care of it. And then I remember as I was giving out used clothing that people appreciated that very much. And I was in the mountains and I was giving out used clothing to indigenous people. And we would receive just huge sacks of clothing that we would give out. And when I was there, all these people came and they're very shy and humble. And I was taking out different things and I was giving personally clothing to them that I thought would be right for them. And I picked out a jacket, a man's jacket, and there was a very shy man that had his head hung over, and I gave him a jacket, and he put it on. He was very happy, and I told him, "Oh, you look just like a senator in that jacket." And he was the happiest man. He was that's a moment that I'll remember forever. How much that changed his attitude toward himself, his self-value. And as I was pulling out more things, every once in a while I'd be pulling out a bra or a bikini top or something, and I'd kind of stick it back down, and I would take out shirts and pants and everything. And then all of a sudden, I happened to pull out a bra. And I was so embarrassed because this is a very conservative group, and I think I was going to put it behind my back. And the women were like, me. And all of them wanted that, and they wanted more and more. And so we went back and we're looking through the bags to find more underwear. And it's, they didn't have undergarments. They're a very poor community, and the last thing that they would buy probably would be undergarments. So they were very joyful to receive those. So sometimes you never know what's going to happen. And from France, we received containers of delicacies like truffles and foie gras and some wonderful crackers. And what do you do? And I think people aren't going to eat this. It's a lot of Americans that don't even like this. And so what we did is that we packaged all those up into little gift bags, and we gave those out to the communities that had lost their homes, that their whole community, their neighborhoods were flooded, that they were from the wealthier class. And they appreciated that so much because no one ever thought of them. And they had lost their homes, they had lost everything. But because they were well off and they had their businesses or they had a high-paying job, it was just kind of taken for granted that they would be able to restart their lives by themselves. But they had lost everything too, so that was a personal touch for them to have a gourmet bag from the First Lady's office. So there's always something you can find to do with these different things, and even the wool hats and everything, those are great for babies, newborn babies, to keep them warm. So you try to find a solution to all these different problems and that present themselves along the way, but there's always someone that comes up with a good idea for what to do. I would like to tell you also that when all these dignitaries came, it was so important to have them there with us and for our people to know that people cared so much and countries cared for us. But I think it was very hard on our ambassador and his wife to receive all these people. And we were constantly at the airport receiving everyone. And then Ambassador Cragen had to receive many of these people in his home, in his residency. And I remember many times going there, and his wife would be washing the dishes in the bathtub because they didn't have running water either. And they had to make everyone's visit very pleasant. And there were some people that were staying overnight and trying to visit and actually sleep with the people in the shelters. And the logistics of having everyone comfortable and everyone with the right amount of security and all the necessities of home, like fresh water and a bath and their beds, and it was overwhelming. And I don't know how he got through it, and his wife was so charming, and she went the extra mile every way to attend these people. And when people come to visit from other countries, you don't realize how expensive it is. And it's expensive because they have to have so many things on the ground to be able to make these visits. And sometimes I know people want to criticize people from the heads of state from going to other countries, but it's very important to know that the United States cares, and there's nothing more important than having the American president come, or the First Lady, to come to your country to say, we care about you. And the funds for their visit actually come out of the big donation that you receive in aid, because it takes a lot of money to move the head of state. But you receive so much more because they visit and they go back with their personal testimony that it's worth it in every way. So it doesn't make any difference if a president is traveling someplace in the United States. You know how all the traffic stops and how you can't go into any area where he'll be visiting, and how many secret agents are on the ground, and that he has to bring in his own car and all that. That happens overseas too. So it's a lot of work for those trips. And not only is it a lot of work for the person in Washington, it's a lot of work for the person on the ground, like Ambassador Cragen. But we were so very blessed from all the donations that we received. And Jeff invited me here today, and the topic is really about medical care that we received. And there were so many brigades that came down and intervened in different communities, and it was mostly for infectious infections that the children and the people had from respiratory infections, or from stomach infections, or because their skin was infected from being in this floodwater for so long. We didn't have all these terrible stories like you saw in Haiti, but there were a lot of really sad cases where people were so undernourished that all these conditions were aggravated to another level. And so some of the stories from the medical brigades that I think were interesting is that since the people, we have 80% literacy rate, but when you get out in the rural communities, a lot of these people, they don't read or write, and it's very difficult to give them instructions of how to take their medicine. So doctors came up with the idea of putting a sun to take the pills in the morning, and at night to put a little sun with a 1 and put a moon with a 1, so they know to take one morning and night, or just a little sun with a 1 that once a day. And sometimes it was easier explaining to the children how to really got kind of frustrated and missed the message in a way, because they might have 5 or 6 children that they brought to be cared for. And you would find that a lot of people were so impressed by the care that they were given by the medical groups that they would name their children after the doctors and nurses that came down and after the people that were helping. And they especially like attractive people. So if you were pretty, you got a lot of special smiles from a lot of young people there, and usually they like to know your name because they use that name for their babies. And then if you had a really good, charming personality and that you really liked people, they were really going to like you too, and they would always remember the first name of the person, even though they wouldn't remember the NGO. And then a lot of neighborhoods, and there are communities now that have a lot of names of people from the United States. And you know they're a new community, and they were built during Mitch because of that American name. Also, I wanted to speak to you a little bit before I finish about, let's see. Oh, I wanted to talk to you about the volunteers who come, and that sometimes, you know, they really don't come with a group and they just come down to help. Well, I think any volunteer can help in some way, and when they come down, if they're not with an NGO or they're not with a church group, if they really have in their heart the desire to help the country or help someone in need, they find the right group to work with. They'll go to the Rotary clubs, they'll go to the churches, or they'll look for the NGOs that are working on the ground, the Red Cross, CARE, to any of those that are working in what they specifically want to work with, whether it's children, older people, whether it's hospitals, or giving out aid, or the engineers who come down to find solution for all the infrastructure problems, or the agricultural experts that come down. They look for the right NGO to lend their expertise and to make a difference. And so many of the volunteers that come down, they think that, oh, well, my work is almost nothing. You know, it's like one more drop in the proverbial bucket of poverty, that how can you make a difference if you're just doing this little bit or you're comforting one person? But each drop is a life, it's a human life. And a drop can be a person like Carmencita or Miguel or Rafael. It can be a child, it can be a parent, a grandparent. It's anyone that you're making their lives better, so you do make a big difference. And it's amazing how one person can mean so much to another person, that you're there with them when they're crying, you're there with them when they are praying, you're right there comforting them, and you're seeing them how they go through a difficult crisis, and you're helping them to find aid, and you're there with them to the very end. And I remember a group that came to visit me, and they came into the office, and they only had on shorts and flip-flops. And some of the people in my office said, I don't think you should receive them, Doña Mary, because they're not properly dressed. That's very disrespectful that they just came in shorts and their sandals. And I said, no, I'm glad to receive them. I'm glad to receive anyone. And they came in, and their story was so touching because they had helped for 2 weeks out in a remote village. And they, before they left, they had given away all their clothes, all their belongings, and even their suitcases. And that's all they had to go back to the United States with their clothes. And so it's amazing what Americans do. And I really think that the experience with Mitch, with all the American community coming down, is really what made me special in their eyes and the lives of the Honduran people. And all through the time, and even to this day, when I hear the national anthem, tears run down my eyes. And, well, I just don't know how I could ever thank everyone that came to Honduras to help us out. And I told Jeff that I really didn't want to come and talk about this because I haven't talked about this since it happened. And I never wanted to go back there and revisit all these things because it was a terrible tragedy. And much like people that come back from a war, they don't want to go and talk about that again. You know, you survived it, you got through, you know, it was a terrible experience, and it was a beautiful experience too because of everything that happened afterwards and how people came to our aid, and there are people still coming to this day, a long-term relationship because they fell in love with the people in Honduras because they're a very generous, warm people, and they appreciate so much what Americans are doing. And so for global diplomacy, I think our economy and our nation is just as strong as the number of Americans that are down there in the country. And when Americans aren't there with us and involved in the NGOs, involved in the churches, we feel pretty left out and pretty lonely. And we really rely on the Americans, you know, kind of to boost our hope and to know that we're still part of this great community. And there's so many Hondurans that walk that very long walk to get to the United States and to come here and to be part of the United States because it is the greatest country in the world. And I think you should be very proud of that, that people want to come. Wouldn't it be sad if people didn't want to come to the United States? It would be so sad if they didn't. And so our Hondurans, they want to come because they need a job. They need to support their family. They need education for their family, or maybe they need health care. Because if they had all that in Honduras, they wouldn't travel. They wouldn't go through that experience of going all through Mexico and having all their family raise these $6,000 or $8,000 so they can make this trip through 2 or 3 countries, especially the long trip through Mexico to get here. And so it's amazing what they do to come. But the more that you come down and the more that you're there in Honduras and you're helping us find solution to all these problems that the Hondurans know there's a solution because they see on TV. And so when you come down and you're there and you assure them that they're getting the same care as they receive in the United States, that means so very much to them. And I think for everyone in all the countries of the world with America's presence, I think it's the same as in Honduras, that Americans mean security, and Americans mean that you're there for us and you care about people that are living in poverty and you want to give them a better life, and your example of just being there means so much to the people, to the children, that they're going to have greater opportunities than their parents did. And so from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of all of the Honduran people, I want to thank all of you that have come to Honduras, or you have come to other countries where the native population has felt such a strong presence as we felt in Honduras. And we'll never forget what the United States did for us after Mitch. It was a beautiful experience. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. Wow. Isn't that great? Thank you so much, Mary, for that first-person account. Dr. Shah, do we have some of the recipients of some of the awards in this session? Okay. I think we have about, Jeff, do you have anything that you wanted to add? And then we'll open it up for some questions, comments, so forth.
I would like to say one thing is that Mary Flores is a very modest person, as you've realized. when she would come to communities, either by car or however she came, people would come to be just to see her. They called her the angel because she brought hope to them, hope that things were going to be okay. And so, if there's any better American citizen diplomat, it's Mary Flores, who really was the heart of the country during its darkest hour. And that generosity of spirit really carried throughout Latin America. If any of you, I'm sure that Ambassador Kagan would know, everyone would recognize her picture during those times because of the example. And maybe you would like to say a few words.
Yeah, no, you're a guest. I just, great to see you. I just jumped on the plane yesterday. I just wanted
To say that precisely what you said. I mean, but you can kind of tell from her presentation or not, but Mary Flores definitely was, for the people of Honduras at that critical time, she gave them hope. She really was the personification, if you will, of hope there. And I must say, an intrepid lady as well. My wife had photos for me, but I forgot naturally as it went off to. But Mary and Gwen, my wife, would go off on the helicopters with no doors or anything on the sides and make their way to the villages. And once in the medical area, you remember we operated on. It was Operation Smile, and the physicians came down with a plane with the operating room and everything. Her husband, the president, and yours truly were in there, and Mary and my wife were dressed as you're supposed to be in the operating room, and her husband began to help with the operation. Well, he fainted. I fainted. I don't know if he fainted, but I did. And Mary and Gwen then went in and helped the doctors. I wanted to say that it's so important, the role of the NGOs. The decision we made when, after Hurricane Mitch hit, the president declared an emergency, and then I notified Washington and declared same. The money would flow, and with the president of Honduras, we made a determination, you'll recall, to funnel funds through the NGOs. I mean CARE, I mean CRS, I mean World Vision, and I mean I'm forgetting all the others. But that was a way to have the non-governmental organizations, and for our part it was in the U.S., but as Mary had said, they were from all over the world, to have them really delivering the aid in a way that governments cannot do. It's difficult for the recipient, it's difficult for the donors, it works best if the governments coordinate. And one thing we had as well, you were difficult as it was, and the capital was cut off, but Katrina showed the difficulties domestically in the United States, where you have a city, and you have a state, a governor, and then you have the national level, and Katrina's Katrina. But overseas, and with Mitch, we had the lessons that what we could do is, once declared, then our government, in coordination with the other government, in this case the government of Honduras, can take action. And so we were able to take action without intervening layers that make it difficult in the United States, and I think that we've overcome those particular issues of state and federal. It's so important that people come down. As you said, you mentioned President Bush, and I know Mary tried to get him to eat his broccoli, but he refused. But President Bush came down, and as you said, in his approach, I think it was Good Morning America, after he made a very emotional presentation, as a private citizen, I mean, he had come down, as a former president, had come down with AmeriCares. Right? After he made the presentation, one woman let us know that her organization was giving immediately $500,000. So it's important to have Americans down there and making the case. Mary, it's just amazing what you have done and continue to do. And I will I'm in Texas now, and son Kevin sends his regards. He's down on the border helping Central Americans. He and his Honduran wife are working with Central Americans there. But little non-governmental organizations are important. There's one I'm with, it's Texas Water Mission, and the drill wells in Honduras. We've drilled 44 wells and provided pure water for people. There are so many of those small groups and so many physician groups that go down. And I know that once a year, I believe in Copan, they're trying to organize NGOs to get together, because what's important is that they also multiply their efforts by working together. And I think it's in Copan, certainly the Honduran government, the American embassy can give information on that. And that's so there is not unnecessary overlap and duplication, so that the effort can be the best for the NGO, for the people that they're trying to help. Thank you again, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
I just think there are stories that people who came here, they haven't heard, they need to hear.
Dr. Shaw?
When I was asked by now Governor Branstad, at that time President Branstad of Des Moines University, to start the Global Health Department, I was not aware of what was the role in other universities and colleges about global health. So we sent out within our invitation cards and questionnaire that how many of you have something to do with global health, global public health. And out of about 90 letters and invitations we sent out, we got 10 back. We had our first meeting of these 10 colleges, including Central, which was, President was Mr. Rowe, and we got together, we say, okay, let's do what you mentioned about happening in Honduras, that instead of duplicating, let's be part of one system, encourage our students, share our stories, share our sites, and that way we can form, and out of that became a consortium. We are calling it as a Heartland Global Health Consortium, where we share our sites, we share research potential, we get together 3-4 times a year, all our students get together and present. So that's one of the Heartland Global Health Consortium.
Thank you.
One of the great things about that program is the doctors, residents, and senior medical students go down into the Merida area in the Yucatan where we have our campus. They use our facility, and undergraduates from Central and Simpson who want to get into health professions go along and fall in love with this thing called world health and global health. And of course, many of our graduates go to the doctor's medical school because they want you to want to get into rural America, or they want to do what the doctors do. Good. Great job.
I'm a project helper in Honduras for 30 years. Part of the Mitch brigades, et cetera. I was just there 3 weeks ago to check out the Beall was most moving as to Steve, significant donations from very generous people in Texas, South Texas, who had wanted us to expand our micro-lending program for women. And it was, we met some of the women that one woman who had $450, and she had it for 4 months. And that allowed her to start selling vegetables. She paid the money back. And 2 years later, she has 2 restaurants and a chicken stand. And then secondly is all of the women that participate in micro-lending programs have health fairs in which they're looking for bone density, looking for diabetes. And then when I was there was a woman who just had the initial diagnosis of breast cancer, which she didn't know about it. But it was thanks to those women that had that particular program. So it's a very special spot in our heart for Project Hope.
Thank you again for your participation. I think if there's a message that I've heard throughout the day is that in addition to every citizen being an ambassador, yes, we need a diplomatic for the government, the official relations, but the people-to-people programs, I think that's what touched the First Lady's heart, the people coming with technical skills, but even those of us that may lack in technical skills, we can show our love and concern, our compassion with our smile and just our presence. And so every citizen an ambassador, and there's plenty of work to go around. So God bless you for your program and your presentation. Thank you for your participation, and I'm going to have dinner with Robert Redford tonight, and I thought I would invite 300 or 400 of my other friends, so please come to that later on. Thank you for participating.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that was